Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave, and I'm sure you've heard of the popular MERN stack or mean stack or maybe the MEVN stack. Of course, that's React, Angular, and Vue making up those one letters, but there's three other letters that reoccur in each of those stacks, M, E, and N. That's Mongo, Express, and Node. Today we're going to work with all three, so let's get started. Today we're building a REST API with Node, Express, and MongoDB. I'm starting out with some starter code, a repo that is from my REST API Basics tutorial, and I will link to that in the description below, link to the repo and to the video tutorial as well. But this will give us a jump start, just getting everything rolling just a little faster today. So what we want to do first is check out the package.json. Look at the dependencies, and you can see we have cores and express, dev dependencies, we have nodemon. I want to go ahead and open up a terminal, and you can do that by going to the terminal menu, or like I did with control and then the backtick key. What I want to do is add a couple of dependencies, one for production and one for dev. Let's go ahead and add the npm I and then type mongoose. Press enter and let that install. With Mongoose installed, go ahead and type npm I and then .env and then -D, which is a flag for save dev, and this will install .env as a dev dependency. All right, with both of those now installed, I'll close the terminal. You can see .env under our dev dependency and Mongoose under our dependencies. Now in the file tree, I'm going to create another folder and name it config. And in the config folder, I'll create a file named db.js. Here I'm going to define mongoose and set it equal to require, and then require mongoose. And then we'll define a connect db function that is async, and we'll pass in db, and will be equal to, well, it's an arrow function. We'll start our try block, and we will await mongoose.connect, and the first parameter in the connect is db, and after that we have an object, and these are things that are specific to MongoDB, and if we don't use them it will tell us to. So we'll go ahead and put these in. Use unified topology and then use new URL parser. Set both of those to true. After that, we'll go ahead and put in a console log that we want to leave in here that says connected to MongoDB. And then we have our catch block yet. We'll have catch, and the error, and then we'll just console the error. But we're not quite finished yet, because at the bottom now we want to put module.exports equals connect db and save that. Okay, let's go back to the server, and we're ready to do some cleanup now, as well as keep a few things. We'll start with express and cores like we previously had, and then let's go ahead and require .env, and then we'll call config after that. And then underneath that, let's define that connect db, set it equal to require, and then we'll have a ./config/db. And then let's go ahead and leave a line, and then we have our app equals express. Now we need another line here, and this will be const db equals process.env then in all caps database underscore URI. And you can see we already have a process.env for the port here as well, but we've always defaulted to 3000, and that's what I did in the REST API Basics tutorial as well. But this lets you know if you want to define the port inside of a .env file, you can also do that. So let's go ahead and create our .env file now. And that is over here in the root, and we'll just start with a dot, a period, and then env in lowercase. Now inside this file, we can define the database underscore URI. And we'll set an equal sign here, but we don't have the URI yet. So let's save what we do have back in the server. Let's save that. Now we're ready to go to MongoDB, set up our free account, and get that connection string that we can put in here for our database URI. All right, let's open Chrome up, and you want to go to mongodb.com. On the far right, you can choose Sign In. And if you don't have an account, of course, there'll be a link here that says Sign Up as well. There's the Sign Up link. There are free accounts. You can log in with Google if you have maybe a gmail.com address. And I'll just type in my email address here as well. Hit Next. And I should be logging in. Once you're logged in, it usually takes you to the last cluster you had open, but you can click the leaf in the top left to go to the organization home. You have your own organization account if you've signed up. And here you get a list of projects, so you just want to go to the right and click New Project. We'll call this Mongo Tutorial. Click Next. And here you could give others access by email address. You are the project owner. You can create the project now. After you've created your project, it brings you to the clusters, and you want to build a cluster. So click that, and you'll have some choices. Of course, we want the free cluster. That's great for small projects like this. And then you get to choose cloud provider and region. I usually stick with the defaults here. On the cluster tier, make sure you have the free chosen, and it looks like that's what we already have there. And then go ahead and create cluster. This takes a few minutes, so I'll pause the video and come back when it is finished. With the cluster created, you see this screen here, and we do have a connect button we're going to go to in a minute, but first let's click collections. And here you get the choice to load a sample data sheet or add my own data. Let's choose add my own data. And let's name our database, and we'll call this quotes DB. And we need to enter at least one collection name, so let's go with authors for now. And then we'll click create. Now you can see we have our quotes DB, and underneath it we have authors. If we go back to the overview, and maybe we need to click Mongo Tutorial up here. There we go. Here's our area that has the connect button as well, because now we need to click connect. And for security, you could add your IP address. You could add a different IP address like your where your app is hosted. But what we're going to do is just allow access from anywhere for this tutorial. We'll go ahead and allow access everywhere now, but you could add additional security for production if you needed to. Create a database user. So we'll keep this simple. We'll go Dave, and then I'll do 1212. And again, we'll go Dave 1212. Okay, and we'll create a database user. Now we get to choose a connection method. There's a Mongo shell. We're not using that. Connect with MongoDB Compass. That's if you download and install Mongo on your computer. We're using the Mongo Atlas, which is in the cloud. So we'll just connect our application right here. And it gives us our connection string. And you can see it's got Dave1212. We're going to need to replace this My First Database with our database name, which was quotesDB. And we'll need to replace this with the password, which is also Dave1212 for what I'm doing. We could do that, or click copy right here. Either way works. And now that we've finished that, we can go back to our code, and in the .env, we just paste it right here. We don't even need quotes. And then let's replace this password. There we go, Dave1212. And my first database is actually quotesDB. Now let's save this .env file. And we'll go back to the server for some more cleanup. Now that we have required the connect DB, we can use this and we will connect. So let's make a little note here, connect database, and we'll say connect DB, and we'll pass in the DB we have. And then we'll keep our middleware for cores. We'll keep our app.options. This is a pre-flight check for complex requests, and JSON requests are considered to be complex. So we want to keep that. We'll use the middleware for JSON because that's what we plan to use. We're not going to use forms. We're actually not going to create a front end at all for this. If you did plan on using form data, you could do this instead of JSON, but I'll get rid of it. I'll go ahead and keep the log, and this logs it to the console of Node when we get a request, and that's good for development, and sometimes you may want to just leave it in there. We don't need these static directories, and we'll get rid of those directories as well. We're also going to get rid of these definitions for these routes, and here we will change these. We'll keep at least 3 of them, but right now I want to comment them out so they don't cause an error, because we just want to get our basic connection going. Here for the root get request, we won't send a file now, so I'll get rid of send file and we'll just have send, and inside of here we'll just put a simple message. We'll say hello world. That would come back into the browser if we were to request the page. We'll get rid of these get responses, and we'll keep the app.all because we want the invalid route to be a catch-all in case there is an invalid request. And the app listen is fine. So let's save all of that. With the cleanup complete for our Server.js file, we should now be able to open a terminal, run npm run dev, and test out our application, at least for the basics. Here we've got listening on port 3000. Let's see if we connect to the database. And we are connected to MongoDB. Let's also go to Chrome quickly, and we will also confirm if we've got our hello world. I'll reload to see, yes, it's all good. So hello world was sent to our root path, and we are connected to MongoDB. Now we're ready to do some more cleanup. Oh, and notice we also logged those GET requests just when I reloaded the page because of our middleware that logs all requests. I'm going to press Control-C to exit the dev for now, close the terminal, and although we cleaned this up, we haven't handled our routes yet, and we definitely have some cleanup to do in the file tree. One thing we can do is get rid of the CSS directory. We can also get rid of the public directory. We can get rid of the views. And of course, if you want to add views to your project, go right ahead, but I won't be doing that today. For the git ignore, we want to go ahead and add the .env file because you don't ever want to send your .env file up to GitHub. And then we still have a .git folder, and I hadn't initialized that yet, and that's because I made a copy of the previous project. I just copied and pasted in Windows. If you ever have that happen, open up your terminal, and what you can do there is type rm for remove, and then -rf, and then .git. And the git directory is also gone. Now we want to keep routes. Of course, we have our node modules and config, but we will eliminate what's in the routes right now. So let's select all of these files and delete those. There we go. Now we've got a couple other directories to add. The first one being models, as we'll need to have some models for our MongoDB data store. And then inside routes, we want to create another directory named API. So we have routes/API. And then we're going to have a middleware directory also for some custom middleware we write. I'm going to close the terminal window again, and let's get started on the models. And we're going to have one for each collection that we have in MongoDB. And the first one will be author with a capital A.js. And inside here, we'll define mongoose. It's equal to require mongoose. And then we'll define a schema with a capital S and set that equal to mongoose dot schema with a capital S. Then we'll define an author schema, set it equal to a new schema, and inside of that we'll just have a name, MongoDB does assign an ID automatically, so we don't need to put that here, and it would be an underscore ID actually. But it's type string, and then required will be true. After that, we just need to come down here and say module.exports, set that equal to mongoose.model, and then we'll say author, and then author schema, and save this file. I'm going to go ahead and select all and copy, and now highlight models again and create a category with a capital C.js. Inside this file, I'm going to paste in what we had for author and then just make some changes. So where we have the word author, I'm going to select the others and type category, but this needs to be lowercase right here, and everything else looks good, so we can save this file as well. And then we have one more. I'll highlight models again and create quote with a capital Q.js. I'm going to go ahead and paste in the same file contents, but this file will have a little more to it. First, I'll select author again and each occurrence of that and replace it with quote. Again, make this a lowercase q down here. But the quote schema has a little different setup. So the first one with it is quote. Now the other part is the same, type string and required true. Then we'll put a comma, and then we'll have author ID, and it has a type, but this will be schema with a capital S, and then types with a capital T, and object ID. And then required is true. And then we'll put a comma here, and I'm going to copy this down. I'll delete this last comma. Same type, required true, but it is the category ID. And these IDs will refer to the IDs of authors and categories in the other collections. So we'll save that, and we're finished with the models. So let's go ahead and hide a few things there, and now inside the API folder we'll create some new files, and we'll have authors with a lowercase a, and notice it's also plural, and then we'll also go ahead and create categories.js and quotes.js. And we'll start with authors again. Inside the authors.js route, we'll define express, set that equal to require, that's express. Then we'll define router and set this equal to express.router with a capital R. And then we'll define author with a capital A, and we will require the model we created. There we go. And then we'll start our route. It's for a post route. It would be the default. It's an async anonymous function here with request and response. And an arrow. We'll start with a try block. Here we'll define author and set it equal to new author. And the name of the author will be equal to the request.body.name. And that should come in with the request. From there, we'll define a new author and set this equal to await author.save. And then we'll have a response with a status of 201, which means successfully created, and then new author. Then our catch block will have the error, if it occurs, and a response status of 400, which means bad request. And we'll pass some JSON in here, and we'll just say error.message. And after we save that, we're almost finished, but we can't forget the module.exports equals router at the bottom of this file. Now let's go ahead and select all of that and copy, go to the categories, and we'll paste this in, but we'll change author to category. And now we'll just need to make some of these lowercase. So we've got category capitalized there, category here, lowercase category, new category again capitalized there, and then down here, new category, lowercase category there, new category. Okay, I think we've got it. We'll save that file and we'll move on to the quotes.js, once again pasting in what we had from author, but quotes.js is a little more complicated. So we'll start out with the two definitions at the top for express and router. And not only do we need author, but we'll also, of course, have, there we go, select it and select the other, and we'll have quote, and then we'll also have category. And we're also going to have some middleware we define that we'll use with the route. But let's go ahead and create the route first, and then we'll come back and put the middleware into the route. So this would create a new quote with the post, and we've got the default route, the request, the response, and then we start with the try block again. So we'll define a quote here, and this will be a new quote. But now we'll switch name to quote, and it'll be request.body.quote, a comma after that, and then we'll have an author ID, and this will be attached to the response, and that is because of the middleware we're going to create. So it's response.author ID with a comma, and then category ID will also be res.category_ID, and that res stands for response. After that, we'll have new quote instead of new author, so we can go ahead and select the other occurrences of author here, switch those to quote, go ahead and make this a lowercase q, and so we're saving the quote, we're sending a successful message with the new quote, and the error message is the same as well. So now we need to create this middleware, and the reason we have the middleware is when a quote is submitted, it also must have an author ID and a category ID, and the author ID must exist and the category ID must exist. So this middleware will create one for author and one for category, is going to check if those IDs do exist before the quote is accepted. Let's highlight our middleware folder and create a file called getAuthor.js, and in this file we'll define author with a capital A and require our model, there it is, and then we'll start here with module.exports instead of having it at the bottom, and we'll set it equal to an async function. Oh, and we need to name the function getAuthor instead of an anonymous function, and it's request, response, and next. Next is important so middleware can continue on in the path. Then we'll define author with let here, and we'll start a try block and set author equal to await, and then our model author find by ID, and we'll pass in the author ID that is sent with the request. Then we'll say if there is no author, we will return, and the keyword return is important, so we actually exit the function then. Status of 404 means not found, and a JSON message, and this message will say cannot find author. So that's if we have no author, and then we'll have our catch block. And here we'll also have a return, so it exits if we're in a catch. And this will be a status 500, which means server error. And then we'll have a JSON response, and we'll just say error, and then have the error dot message. But after that, we need to go ahead and set the response author ID equal to the ID that was sent, because if it gets here, it's successful. And then we call next, so we continue the chain of the middleware. And that ends our middleware function for get author. Let's go ahead and select all of this, and then highlight the middleware directory and create get category.js. Just going to paste in everything that we had in author, select all the instances of author, which there are quite a few in here. And we can change these to category. And then of course we have to change the uppercase, lowercase issues where they exist. So we've got category there. We'll define a lowercase category here and continue to work with the lowercase category. And that is also lowercase and lowercase. Let me double check. Looks like that should be lowercase as well. With our middleware defined, let's go back to the quotes.js in our routes API folder. And here we need to bring in the middleware. So we'll define get author and set that equal to require, and then 2 dots to go up a directory, 2 more dots to go up another directory, and now we choose middleware, and in there we choose get author. And then we also define get category. We'll require 2 dots slash 2 dots slash middleware slash get category. And we'll save that, and now we can use these in our path, and we'll put them right here. There's get author and then get category. So you can see as the route comes in, it checks first the get author function, then the get category function before it gets to our async anonymous function here for the route. If we save this, we've now created post routes for quotes, categories, and authors, and we've created the middleware as well. So we're ready to try to interact with our database at Mongo. Okay, let's open a terminal window again. And here I'll type npm run dev, and we'll make sure our application is listening on port 3000 and then connects to MongoDB. And we are connected to MongoDB, so let's pull up Postman. Well, first let me show you where to get Postman, just in case you don't have it. Go to postman.com/downloads, and you can download the Postman app. It's great for testing APIs. And then we will come back to our cluster here and check our collections in MongoDB. So here is the Postman app. And it has a launch pad. We want to click the little plus symbol to create a new request. This is a GET request. I'm going to choose post. We created post routes. I'm going to enter in localhost port 3000/API/authors. And I just thought of something. We didn't create the routes yet back in our server. We commented those out. Let's go back to the server. Nodeman will keep our application running. As we test it, we commented these routes out. We need to change that. I'll grab this commented out area and reverse that by pressing Control Alt and A. And then here, when it says app use, we want it to say API quotes. There we go, spell it right. And then over here, we don't want to define a variable like we had before. We'll just pass in the require quote and then .routes/API/quotes. Now this will be very similar for the other two, so it might be handier if I just copy and paste. And one more. Now instead of quotes here, this would be authors, and this would be categories, and the same here. Need an I there for categories. Okay, so we've got in our routes now. Now notice we're going to use the route API/quotes, but it's actually, we're requiring routes/API/quotes. That means we can have a routes folder in our project, and we won't actually require the user to use it. So just to use the API, we'll just have to say localhost 3000 API quotes. So there, that is saved, and we'll see node mon restarts us, and we're listening on port 3000. It'll connect back to MongoDB in just a second. Okay, we're connected and good to go. Now back in Postman. We've got our localhost 3000 API authors, and now we need to check our headers because we're going to use content type application/JSON. And then in the body, we'll just say raw JSON here that we can write right here. So we'll put in a name, and our first author quote will be Steve Jobs. And now we're ready to submit with a send. And in return, we get the ID of the author. And of course, the name was saved. And this is the version. In case it's updated, this version count would go. So MongoDB automatically provides the underscore ID here and this underscore V for version. And we've added Steve Jobs. Since we're here, let's go ahead and add just a few more people we intend to quote. We'll have Tim Berners-Lee. And we'll add Neil deGrasse Tyson. And one more, he's always good for a quote, is Mark Twain. Okay, now let's go back to Mongo in Chrome, and let's check out our authors table. We might need to refresh. Yes, it says it has 4 documents now. We're loading the documents. Here they are. We've got all 4 authors here, and they're considered documents in MongoDB. Now let's go back to Postman. And to add a quote, we also need to have some valid category IDs. And the category ID was also saved with a name. So we changed the URL to API/categories. And now we can just use name again, and we'll put in the category. And the first category we're going to use is code-data-design. And we'll send that. And yes, that also worked. So now we have code-data-design in as a category. And we'll add another category called travel. And we'll add one more for now, that is knowledge-learning. Okay, so we have IDs for all of those. Let's go back to Mongo again. Verify that we have that new data. Let's click refresh over here. And now we have QuotesDB with authors and categories. We have 3 categories. There's our code data design, travel, and knowledge learning. Normally, you would get the IDs returned, and of course you would grab those programmatically for submissions or updates or deletions or anything like that. I'm going to grab these manually for now so we can use them in Postman. So there's the knowledge learning ID, and then I'll cancel out of that. And there's the travel ID, and then I'll cancel that. And then there is the code data design ID, and I can cancel there. Now I need to get the IDs of the authors as well. So Steve Jobs, his ID goes right here. Okay, so now we've got at least one author. Let me grab another one, Tim Berners-Lee. No, he's in the same category. Let's grab Neil deGrasse Tyson. And we'll at least get in a couple of quotes in a couple of different categories here. Okay, so now we're ready to add a quote. And now that will be a little bit larger because we need several things for the quote. If we remember right, we needed, oh, and let's change this to quotes so we don't submit to the wrong collection. We need the quote itself. So let's get Neil deGrasse Tyson here. We've got his quote in now. Put a comma there, and then we'll have in the author underscore ID. Oh, and it needs to be in quotes as well. Author underscore ID. And this author is Neil deGrasse Tyson, and this goes in quotes too. And then we need the category underscore ID. And this is the knowledge learning category. Okay, so we're ready to submit our quote. We have a quote, author ID, and category ID. And now let's submit this. And now the quote has its own ID, and it is also storing these. Now in a SQL database, the author ID and the category ID would be foreign keys. But here, a NoSQL, MongoDB, these are documents, and it doesn't really work like a relational database. However, we can keep track of this programmatically, and we know that these are related. I'm going to go ahead and add one more quote. We'll get Steve Jobs in here. And there's the quote. Now we'll get his ID, and we need the ID for the code data design category. And now we'll submit. And we have a couple of quotes in our database. Let's go back to Mongo, and we can refresh. And now we've got quotes. And here's our 2 quotes records. Now that you see how MongoDB works and how we're able to send requests with Postman, let's go back to our code and finish the routes for the quotes. Right now we just create a new quote, which is part of a CRUD operation. So C for CRUD, the acronym, is create. The next is read. So let's go ahead and create something that reads all quotes. And we'll start with router.get. This will be a GET request. And then we'll have an async anonymous function with request response and an arrow. And inside this function, we'll start with try. And here we'll define an empty array and say all quotes, because it's going to take just a little more work to get everything back here. So we'll say quotes is equal to await quote.find. And this should return all the quotes in our quotes collection. And then we'll have for quote of quotes. That's kind of like a for each loop, but it's a little safer when running async code. Or in other words, you might get things out of order if you used for each. So here we have author.find by ID, quote.author underscore ID. And then we define the category. We'll await the category.find by ID, and we'll have quote.category underscore ID. And then we'll have all quotes.push, and here we'll have quote, author, and category as we build that. And then after we have worked our way through that loop, we'll just have a responsive JSON that sends all quotes. And then we have a catch block, catch any error, and this would be a response status 500, which is a server error, sorry, and we'll send error.message. If we save that, we're almost finished. Let's just put a semicolon there, and we'll save again. And that will read all quotes. So we can test that out in Postman as we make it. We need to go to a GET request, and we'll have no body to that. And this should just send us back all quotes here. So let's go ahead and make the request. And we can see we got both quotes back, Steve Jobs and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And not only did we get the quotes, I'll bring this up just a little further, we've got their related ID, the author ID and category ID stored with the quote, but then we also get the author, comes with his ID, and the category with its ID. And the same here for the Steve Jobs quote. Okay, let's go back and create another route. Let's read a quote by ID. Say we want a specific quote from our data. So we'll say read quote by ID. And this will be just a little different than the above. So we'll start with router.get. Once again, it goes to the default route, but we'll also look for an ID afterwards, a parameter in the URL here. And then we'll put async request response arrow function, and we will try. We'll define a quote. Will be equal to await quote dot find by ID. And so request params dot ID is how we'd get that out of the URL from a GET request. And then we'll say if there is no quote, return response status 404. Then it's JSON, and we'll have a message that says quote not found. And then hopefully there is a quote, so we'll define an empty array called myQuote. We'll have author, and that will equal await author.find by ID. And here we'll have quote dot author underscore ID. It looks like I missed an equal sign or two. There we go. And then we'll also have the category. Await category dot find by ID. We'll have quote and then category ID. And after that, we'll have myQuote dot push. And here we'll push in the quote, the author, the category, and then our JSON response. Then we'll have a catch with the error, response status 500 again, server error, send error.message. Okay, so let's look back at Postman and get one of those IDs of one of the quotes we got returned. So here's our quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. And here is the quote ID. So now, if we put this ID after, at the end of the URL, and we submit, we got the quote back from Neil deGrasse Tyson, but we didn't get all the quotes. So this route works. It just returns one quote. The quote is looked for by the ID. Okay, now let's create an update route. Scroll up just a little bit, and this will be update quote by ID. Here we'll have router.put instead of get or post. And once again, slash with the ID and the parameter. But the way to differentiate it is a put request. And now we have to once again call our middleware, get author and get category. And we have an async request and response. Then a try block. And here we can define our quote again. I can probably copy some of this. We'll start out the same way. Here we go. And if the quote is not found, we'll continue. Then we'll say if request.body.quote quote.quote equals request.body.quote. And then we'll have quote.author ID equals res.author_ID. Again, that's from our middleware. Quote.category ID will equal res.category_ID. And then we'll have an updated quote set equal to await quote.save. And if that's successful, we'll have res.status 201, which is also a good reply for an update. And we have our updated quote that is sent back. So here we have our catch. And this is, once again, res.status 500, and send the error message. So this is a lot like creating the quote, because you're essentially overriding what was there, but you need the information from the previous quote in order to update that. Now let's create our last route, or our last action here of the CRUD, because this is our update. Of course, we had read in, we could read all quotes or one, and then we had create. So we have our CRU. We're ready for the D of CRUD, and that is delete quote by ID. So here we'll have router, and this is a delete request. Once again, we'll have the default path with the parameter of an ID in the URL. Async request response, an arrow function, and a try block that starts out the same way again, so we can just copy the beginning here. And after that, we'll go ahead and close the try block so I don't forget. And then we'll just say await quote.remove. Okay, and then we will catch the error. And this is the same again, so I'm also going to copy that. And you can see the delete was fairly simple compared to some of the others. Okay, let's test these routes in Postman. If we go here, we're on a GET request. We need a put, and we have a quote already in the URL, which is fine. Then let's go ahead and add some data. So here's this quote with this data. It's not the one we want. Let's go ahead and add this quote back in. And I'll put an exclamation mark at the end of the quote so we can tell something has changed there. The author ID, we need to have the same. And we also need to pass in the category ID. Okay, we'll send this. And now in response, you can see we got the quote back with an exclamation mark on it. And we can check that in Mongo as well. And we'll look at quotes. Maybe we need to refresh. And it's hard to see the full thing here. Let's see if we can expand it. Maybe if we edit. Yes, exclamation mark is there at the very end. Okay, we'll cancel that edit. And let's try a delete now back in Postman. And we'll choose delete. There's no need for a body there. It's just a delete request, and it has the ID once again as a parameter in the URL. And we'll send. Looking like something may be wrong here. Let's take a look at our code just to verify. We've got the delete after the await remove. We didn't put in our response JSON, so we weren't getting a response. Put in that message, and then quote removed. We might have already removed the quote and just not got a response back. After that, we should be good. Let's check Mongo real quick to see if we have that quote in there. It actually removed the quote and we just didn't get a response back. So let's use this other ID and remove the other one. Cancel, back to Postman. Here we go, and we're ready to send our delete request. And now we got our response, quote removed. If we look back at Mongo, our collection is probably going to be empty now with a refresh. No results in the quotes collection, so we did have another successful delete. Okay, so going back to look at our code, what we have left are to create these exact same kind of routes for authors and categories. We created the first route, the post, which is create, but you need read, update, and delete for authors and categories, just like we put in quotes. But it should be a little simpler, as most of the things directly working with authors and categories were. So that is kind of your assignment. Go ahead and take what we've learned by working with the quotes.js file and apply it to categories and authors. And then if you want an additional challenge, go ahead and build a front end for this project so you can submit quotes and display quotes and maybe even write some function that will return a random quote. But that would be a good way to complete the full stack. Remember, we have Mongo, Express, and Node, which are 3 of the 4 letters from the mean stack, the MERN stack, the MEVN, which would be view. So we have really kind of completed the back end. Well, after you complete your assignment, we will have completed the back end, and then you could put in whatever front end technology you want for a full stack application. I appreciate you guys watching and subscribing, giving the thumbs up and all the comments. I really look forward to it every week. So keep it up, and I will talk to you guys again very soon.